What's up, guys? Welcome back to Katson's Corner. We are back with a solo episode this week to talk about the NFL Combine because it starts technically today. Today is Monday. You guys are probably seeing this on Tuesday. By the time you guys are seeing this, I will be on a plane to Indianapolis to partake in the Combine in person. But for now, we are previewing it from my home studio as per usual. We're going to be talking through some general stuff about what to expect from this week and everything, address some maybe misconceptions that people have about the event, as well as talk about some potential Chargers news that may come out of this week. And then, of course, we'll wrap up with some players that I'm looking forward to seeing this week in Indianapolis, especially as it relates to the Chargers. Before we get into all that, make sure you guys are following me for all of my work I'm going to be doing this week. My Twitter handle is at Alex Katson, same way you see it spelled on the screen. I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff for both the Chargers and the Washington Huskies, my alma mater that I cover as well. So if you guys are interested in any of that stuff, make sure you head over to Twitter and check that out. That's going to be where most of that stuff is going to go. We'll have a few things that'll probably get put up on here as well. I have a lot of ideas bouncing around and stuff, especially with draft season picking back up as we get back into the swing of things with the show. So really excited about that. Hope you guys are too. We're going to go ahead and get started talking about the combine. The number one thing that I want to impart upon you guys in this episode is that while the on-field testing at the combine is cool and fun, and it's the part that is interesting to watch, it doesn't matter that much. And it doesn't not matter entirely, but it doesn't matter as much as people make it out to. Um, no matter how well or poorly a player tests this week, it's not going to shift their position on a team's draft board by that much. Um, Now, this seems a little bit backwards, maybe, but I think the best way to explain this is that the combine is a confirmation bias event. And what I mean by that is that you go into the combine with opinions about prospects already in hand. All of the teams have already watched every single player that's going to be at the combine. Um, that is factual because the teams vote on who to invite to the combine. And so if you haven't watched a guy, you don't vote for him to show up. So every team has already watched every single one of these guys that's going to be in Indianapolis this week. They already have kind of a preliminary, if not mostly finished, mostly like final report on a player coming into this week. This week is mostly about like getting interviews with players that maybe you didn't get to catch earlier, or doing a second interview with someone if you have some background stuff that you need to pick through with them. It's about getting medical testing done for players, especially ones with extensive injury histories that we'll talk about a little bit later here as well. It's about a lot more of that stuff for the teams that are there. The on-field testing is not as important. Um, it is important in the sense that if a player that you thought was going to test really well tests really poorly, you might go back and revisit that player and say, like, okay, why did we think that he was going to test this highly when now we know he tested here, right? And so you may bring him down a little bit, but you're not going to bring him down a ton because, again, you've watched all of the game tape already and you've said, like, this is a guy we're comfortable taking in the second round, say, right? So if he tests like garbage, then you're just like, okay, well, maybe maybe he's not someone that we're looking at 37. Maybe he's someone that we're looking at like if we trade down in the second round or in the third round, maybe. Um, that sort of thing. And same thing the other way, right? Where if you have a guy that you don't expect to test super well and then he tests out of the gym, then you're like, okay, what did we miss, right, on this tape? That one, though, is a little bit different because a lot of times, if a guy tests like that and it's not what he shows on the field, then you have to ask why, right? You have to ask why does he have all of this athleticism that he's not using when he's on the field? And is that something that we can harness out of him? And if it is, then you might move him up a little bit and say, like, okay, we're comfortable taking a developmental shot on this guy at X point. Like if he falls past a certain pick, then maybe we'll start making calls, see if we can trade up for this guy and try to develop him. And if it's not, then you're not going to move him at all. You're just going to say, huh, that's weird. Anyway, like let's continue moving on with our lives. Um, most of these risers and fallers and stuff that you have from the combine, while they are based on the testing and stuff, a lot of the times it's just the media catching up to where an NFL team already has him valued. This is a big networking event for media, teams, everyone involved as well. And so this is also when a lot of like reports start to come out, and when a lot of people catch up with their sources, and when a lot of people catch up with just information that has been percolating around the league. And so a lot of times, like if you hear someone like billed as a riser, right? And it's like, well, their testing was pretty good, but it wasn't like phenomenal. A lot of times that just means that like whoever is reporting that talked to their sources at, 6 or 7 different teams that they haven't had a chance to touch base with about this guy, and all of them said, "Oh, yeah, no, he's gonna be a first rounder, second rounder, whatever." And then the media person comes back and he goes, "Oh, I should move him up then." And then you go, "Okay, well, now he's rising through the process." There are some people, some players that do naturally rise through the process. There's of course always going to be some guys that kind of come out of nowhere, and you're like, oh, all of a sudden this guy is a second rounder. I had no idea. And sometimes the NFL teams feel that way also, right? Or sometimes like it comes out that it's just like, oh yeah, like the NFL just didn't get around to this guy in like a more timely fashion, and now all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, he's going to be a third, fourth rounder. A lot of those guys aren't at the combine though. A lot of those guys are the guys that don't get invited to the combine, like Northern Iowa defensive tackle Christian Boyd, who had a really good Shrine Bowl week and didn't get invited. Um, Most of the guys that are going to be rising and falling through the combine process, keep in mind that like those are media driven narratives, right? And I realize the irony in saying that as a member of the media, who's going to be driving narratives in approximately 36 hours. But a lot of those rising and falling sort of things are media driven, right? It's not how the teams feel. The teams are not like adjusting their boards to a like very strong degree, based on what happens this week in Indianapolis. Um, of course, like I said, there's still plenty of reasons that teams are there, and there's a very important aspect of it that happens there. Again, like medicals, interviews, all that sort of stuff. Um, but there's a reason why some coaches, some GMs and stuff don't travel to the combine anymore. Like the Rams aren't going to send Sean McVay and Les Snead. Robert Saleh from the Jets isn't going to be at the combine. More and more teams are starting to like not send their top brass because they think that the value that you get out of like continuing the scouting process from home when you're all in the same place, and like in a comfortable environment versus the like gain that you get out of going to an event like this is beginning to lessen. um, and a lot of that is again because like the on-field stuff is not the most important. And even if it was, you can watch it on TV. However, there is going to be a lot of stuff that happens behind closed doors. The combine is widely regarded as the beginning of free agency, within league circles. Obviously, legal tampering does not open for another couple of weeks. The league year does not turn over until mid March. Um, So there's still a little bit of time before like any moves are legally allowed to be made. And technically, there's supposed to be a little bit of time left before any teams are allowed to start talking about making any sort of moves. But that's not what happens. And at events like the Combine, what happens is that the league basically turns not a fully blind eye, but basically a blind eye to, hey, listen, if you're going to talk to, if you're the Chargers and you're going to talk to the Bears about a trade, like we're not going to say anything. You can do that. And so this is where a lot of trades start to come together. This is where a lot of free agency signings start to come together. And so this week for the Chargers, I think it's an important week to keep an eye on the news because there's potentially news that we could get about a Joey Bosa trade. There's potentially news we could get about how much the Chargers are shopping Khalil Mack, if at all. There's potentially some news we could get about like a Mike Williams deal. There's potentially news that we could get about the Chargers trying to move off of that number 5 overall pick. There's a lot of different pieces of trade related news that we could get out of this week from a Chargers perspective, because obviously these are all moves that they either need or have been heavily rumored to be making, right? And so the combine is going to be the first opportunity, especially for a team like the Chargers that has a new GM and a new head coach who are both going to be in Indianapolis. Um, it's going to be their like first and best opportunity to initiate some of those conversations and start talking about like, hey, hypothetically, in 3 weeks when the league year opens, if we were to call you about trading Joey Bosa, what would you hypothetically be giving us? Or what do you think like is fair, right? And that's kind of like the way that those conversations are structured, where it's not like directly like, hey, we're going to trade Joey Bosa to you, the 49ers, for a third round pick, and we're going to submit it to the league office in 3 weeks. Is that cool? It's going to be more, kind of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge about it, right? But that news is still going to get around to the assembled media in attendance because there's going to be upwards of 1,000, 2,000 media people that are all in Indianapolis as well. And inevitably, one of those people is going to hear about these conversations that are being had. And so this is when you get a lot of news about like trades, franchise tags, free agent destinations. Like, there could potentially be some news about like a Mike Onwenu, or like a Andre James or someone that the Chargers are targeting in free agency. Whether or not the Chargers are going to target a running back in free agency, which I don't think they will, but some of you think they might. And so like that's something that could come out of the combine this week. Um, all of that sort of stuff starts happening this week in Indianapolis. And so that's a lot of the value of it, from attending from like a GM or a head coach perspective as well, is that while the on-field testing is happening, you're sitting in the bleachers next to, scouts, GMs, head coaches from different teams, and you're kind of just like having exploratory discussions. And again, because it's all verbal and none of it is on the record and none of it is, over the phone or anything like that, none of it is traceable. And so technically it's not tampering, even though it is, right? And so a lot of those things are going to start happening this week. And so again, I think it's uh, probably good practice to anticipate that some of that news might start to trickle out. Whether or not that news is going to end up being correct is a whole different endeavor because the combine is also the beginning of the smokescreen season. Because scouts and GMs and head coaches are not dumb in general, right? And so if you're having a conversation with a team that maybe isn't as interested in trading for Joey Bosa, say, or Mike Williams, or the fifth overall pick, or whatever, um, then you might try to misdirect them a little bit. Joe Ortiz has done this very frequently. Baltimore is often one of the hardest teams to predict in the draft and in free agency and in general roster construction, because there's never really any reports that get out. Um, and so there's going to be a lot of news that ends up not being true also. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the person reporting it is wrong or that they got bad information or anything. It might just be that like someone, someone lied to someone that passed it on. Like it's a game of telephone, right? And so while you need to be critical of things that do come out of this week, keep in mind that there's also going to be a lot that ends up being correct. And so you kind of just have to take all of it in and be open to all outcomes and all scenarios and everything. Obviously, like I know that if it comes out that the Chargers are going to stick at 5 and they really want to take an offensive lineman, then some people are going to be very upset, me included. I don't want them to do that. And if it comes out that the Chargers are exploring trading down very heavily and they're really thinking about it, and like there's people out there that want a wide receiver at that pick, and they're going to be upset about that. And the people that want an offensive tackle at that fifth overall pick are going to be upset. And like all of those reports are going to come out. Uh, you're probably going to get a report that says each one of those things. And we've already kind of seen that starting to happen, right? Where like some people have said like it's between wide receiver and corner for the Chargers at 5. Some people have said it's between offensive tackle and corner at 5. Some people have said it's between Joe Alt and Rome Odunze, like that directly. Um, there's a lot of different reports out there because you're hearing a lot of different things from a lot of different people. Teams are not a monolithic enterprise. There's, dozens of people that work for the team, and they're all going to have to come to a consensus about what to do with that pick and what to do with these players. And so, again, For a team like the Chargers with a new regime, the GM and the head coach are both going to be in Indianapolis. This is going to be an informative week for Chargers fans as far as like how much are we going to know about what the regime is thinking and what they're planning on doing going forward. Because with Tom Telesco and Brandon Staley in charge, A, they didn't travel very much, and B, when they did, it was fairly obvious what they were planning on doing, barring some last minute switcheroos with things. And so, is it going to be more of the same of that, where it's going to be something where it's like we can predict, okay, like they went to this pro day, they went to this event, they're going to pick this guy, or is it going to be like we have no idea and like we're just going to have to see what happens in April? So this week is going to be really informative for like predicting what the Chargers are going to do in subsequent off seasons because we can start to kind of build a profile of what Joe Ortiz is going to be like as a GM and what Jim Harbaugh is going to be like as a head coach in 2024. And so that part and everything that happens behind those doors and like potential rumors that we may get about trades and free agent signings and everything like that, that's going to be almost more informative than anything that happens in the actual stadium in Indianapolis this week. But of course, this is the draft show. We're here to talk about the draft, mostly, most of the time. And so we are going to talk about some of the guys that are going to be in the stadium performing, doing stuff, running drills and everything, because that is ultimately what the combine is for from a consumption standpoint, right? Like it's fun to watch these guys test out of the gym and like pop your eyes out at crazy 40 time numbers and discourse, right? And so like that's fun. And so let's talk about some players that are going to be in Indianapolis that I'm really excited to see that I think could fit the Chargers as well. First one we're going to start with is USC running back Marshawn Lloyd. Obviously, if you guys have been following the news the past week or so, you know that the Chargers hired his running backs coach at USC, Keel McDonald, who was also at Utah before that, as running backs coach. And so Lloyd is immediately someone that pops out as a connection, right? Where obviously the discussion for as long as Jim Harbaugh has been the head coach is, oh, well, the Chargers are going to take Blake Corum in the second, third, fourth, wherever round. And they're just going to roll with that. And it's just going to be the same thing that it ever was. But now that they've hired McDonald from USC, which is right across the street, they already have a leg up on scouting Lloyd because he's right across the street. Now they have a further leg up on him because they hired his running backs coach. He's someone that I'm very interested to see if there's any reported sort of interest or anything comes out from the Chargers side. I imagine that there will be because again, people are going to naturally draw that connection between McDonald and him, the same way that people drew that connection between Chris Beatty and Jordan Addison last season, when the Chargers were thinking about taking him at that 21st overall pick. Obviously, Beatty was the one that recruited Addison to Pitt, that whole thing. And so it's going to be a lot more of the same because ultimately, while McDonald didn't recruit Lloyd out of high school, he is at least partially the reason why Lloyd decided to come to USC as a transfer from South Carolina. Lloyd is also kind of in that back half of the first tier of running backs where like it's going to be very crowded at that top end of running backs. The consensus that at least I've gotten from listening and from hearing um, and from speaking to some people is that uh, there's probably not going to be a running back taken in the first 50 picks, but then after pick 50, there's probably going to be like 8 to 10 of them taken in the next 25 to 30 picks. And so, like, it's going to be very, very crowded, right? Lloyd is kind of in that back half of that first tier of like, he's going to be somewhere in that probably like 60 to 80 range in like the third round or so. And so but he's also the one that is most poised to be a lead back in the NFL. He's the only one that is above 210 pounds, which is generally the NFL's cutoff for like you can handle like 70% of a workload. He's the only one that is well rounded enough to both be like a every down running back and a like receiver and a pass protector and like everything. He's one of the few guys where like there aren't as many questions about his ability to do one or the other of those things. And so I think that he's going to be someone where, as long as he does not have like a disaster week, is going to be someone that's in the mix in kind of that like second to third round range as potentially the first running back off the board. That's going to be informative again for the Chargers because drawing those connections again, it's like, okay, are you going to trade down from one of those picks and try to get into the late second to get him? Do you think he's going to make it to the third? Like, how are you going to play that? All of that is going to kind of come into consideration based on how this week goes for him. At wide receiver, we're going to talk about Odunze because he's the only one of the three top receivers, Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Odunze, who's going to test in Indianapolis. And he's already said that his goal is to run the 4.3s in the 40, which, if you watch Stephen and I's episode last week talking about Daniel Jeremiah's mock draft, we talked about Rome Odunze and his 40 time at length. Some people see a 4.5 athlete on tape. He's going to run it at the very worst in the 4.4s. I can guarantee you that right now. He might get into the 4.3s. Again, his reported 40 time from last offseason during fall workouts with Washington is a 4.34. That time is probably juiced by Washington in their reporting to make it seem like he's a better athlete than he is, which is fine. Every school does that. But there potentially it means that he could get down to like a 4.39, 4.38 if that's all he's been training for the whole time, which is possible. I think he's probably going to end up running in the 4.4s, but that's still going to be a huge win for him because if he's in the 4.4s, that already means that he's faster than everyone thinks he is. And again, it's one of those things where you talk about like, okay, why doesn't he look that fast on tape? And my answer, at least from watching him and from seeing him, the last 3 seasons, is that he's not a super great accelerator. I don't think he's going to have like a super elite 10-yard split on his 40-yard dash. And you can see that in his high school track times, even too, where we've mentioned before, Stephen and I mentioned last week, he's a state champion 200-meter runner. Most of these guys that run like super elite 40 times are state champion 100-meter runners. And if you look at Rome's 100-meter time, it's pretty good, but it's not state champion level. It's not like, oh my God, like this dude is a burner level. It's pretty good. But he won a state championship in the 200 meters, which is twice as long. And so you realize, like, okay, he doesn't get up to top speed maybe quite as quickly, but then once he's up to top speed, he can sustain it for a long time. Um, and so that's going to be informative as well. That 10-yard split, keep an eye on what that number comes in at. If he does somehow get down in the 4.3s, I am personally of the opinion that the Chargers should hang up the phone and just take him at 5. Because if he's in the 4.3s, not only does he fix the Mike Williams problem of Mike Williams is probably getting traded and or released depending on what happens. And so you need someone to replace him and play X. But if Odunze is in the 4.3s, that also fixes your speed problem on offense because he's then the fastest receiver on the team by a pretty decent margin. And so at that point, hang up the phone, take him at 5, take the money, and run. At tight end, we're going to talk about Cade Stover from Ohio State, who we've talked about on the show before. He declared very quietly, like before he got invited to the combine, I wasn't sure if he was in the draft or not because nobody had said anything about his status. But he is in the draft. He's going to be at the combine, and he's going to test pretty well because he's a converted defensive end. He's played linebacker. He's played tight end. He's been all over the field. He also holds his high school record for points in basketball in Kentucky, which you can't do unless you're a pretty good athlete because Kentucky is a pretty good basketball state, if you don't know. And so he's someone that's going to test really well. I think that he's a mid-round option that is being kind of ignored in the process because no one has seen him do anything since December. Offensive line, Joe Alt is the guy to watch because if he tests, you're looking for elite testing in order to be comfortable with moving him to right tackle and taking him at 5. The guys that have succeeded in that move from left tackle to right tackle at high first round picks like that in the last few years have all been elite athletes. And so you're looking for like around like a 9.5 relative athletic score, RAS, from MathBomb over on Twitter from Joe Alt's testing. If you're under that, I'm not going to be as comfortable moving him to right tackle and taking him at 5. Other people are going to feel differently about that. That's totally fine. That's my opinion about it. That's what I'm looking for. On the interior defensive line, I'm looking at Braden Fiskey from Florida State. I think that he kind of fits the mold in Jesse Minter's defense as a kind of like athletic, penetrating style defensive tackle. He had a really good week in Mobile at the Senior Bowl. I'm looking for him to kind of build on that momentum, test well. Again, I think you're going to be looking for like a pretty good athlete here in order to fit in Minter's defense. And so I'm looking for 10-yard split. I'm looking for 40. I'm looking for like a broad jump, like any like measures of explosiveness. I'm looking for from Fiskey to determine like if he's going to be like a solid fit for the Chargers in like a second or third, maybe fourth round sort of range. On the edge, I'm going to be watching Miles Cole from Texas Tech. Um, he had the longest wingspan at the Senior Bowl. I believe it was like 85 something. He is a pterodactyl, but he's not really very good at the football part of football yet. And so he's going to be someone that's available on day 3. But if he tests out the gym like he's expected to, then he's someone that like when you get that far down the board, that sort of testing does matter because a lot of times it's the line between like, are you getting drafted or are you not? And so if he tests out the gym like he's expected to, I think that he's going to be someone that gets into like the sixth, seventh round of drafts. And he's someone that the Chargers could pick up as a developmental guy. Obviously, like that athleticism to harness with Jesse Minter, a defensive coordinator, with Ben Herbert as the strength and conditioning coach. That's an environment that's conducive to developing players like that have kind of been underdeveloped throughout their time in college. So he's someone that I'm really watching to see if he's going to test the way that he's rumored to. If he doesn't, then I'm kind of good on him. Peyton Wilson at linebacker. The big thing for him is not going to be on the field. It's going to be the medicals. Whether or not we get any sort of report about what those look like is to be determined. But obviously, the big thing with him is medicals. He's got a lengthy injury history. And if he can stay healthy, which he did this season, he is probably the best linebacker in this draft. If not, it's Junior Colson from Michigan. And so, how those medical checks come back with that lengthy injury history is going to be key for him because that is going to make or break whether or not he gets drafted like day 2 or day 3 or not at all. You think about someone like Trey Smith, who went to the Chiefs in the 6th round a couple years ago. Like he went to the combine and they found that blood clot issue, and he dropped from like a potential 1st round pick to the 6th round, right? And so this is the kind of thing that we're talking about of like if Wilson's medicals come back bad, we could be like that could be a day 3 undrafted player, depending on how bad they are. If they come back good, he could be a second rounder. And so that's going to be huge for him. And that report is going to be enormous. Corner, I want to talk about Kamari Laster from Georgia because it seems like, as of right now, he's going to be available at that second round pick that the Chargers currently have at 37, which is going to be a big deal if you're looking at taking an offensive player in the 1st round because they need someone that can play corner. But if he tests super well, he could be someone that sneaks into the back half of the 1st round, especially with some of those corners starting to get pushed up the board a little bit, where you've seen like Ennis Rakestraw from Missouri starting to get pushed into like the late teens, early 20s of mock drafts. That kind of naturally pulls everyone up a little bit. And so Laster could be someone that ends up going like 28, 29, 30. That's not what we want. We want him to be available at 37. So like I'm just kind of keeping an eye out for what his stock kind of looks like from talking to people and from the way that he tests and everything this week in Indianapolis as well. And then finally at safety, I'm going to be watching Cole Bishop. I think that he's a great fit next to Derwin and Alohi Gilman if they choose to bring him back at kind of like a traditional strong safety role, which would let Derwin James play more of like a nickel role full time. He is awesome and I just want to see more of him. And so that's why I have him on the list, really. Like, no other reason is like, I just want to see him do stuff. And so I'm excited to see him in Indianapolis as well. That is going to do it for this week, guys. I forgot where the remove button was for a second. I don't know what's going on. But that's going to do it for this week. I hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully you learned something about like what the expectations are for this week. Again, I'm going to be in Indianapolis from Tuesday to Sunday, doing all sorts of content stuff, trying to keep my eye on the ground, ear on the ground to keep an eye out for any Chargers news that may be happening this week. Hopefully you guys keep up on what's happening over there. Again, You can follow me on Twitter at Alex Katson, same way you see it spelled on the screen. Let me know in the comments any other guys you're excited to see in Indianapolis, anyone that you want me to try to talk to in Indianapolis. Every player has media availability, and so like I'm going to try to get to as many as possible. But they're all at the same time, so I can only do so many. But yeah, let me know in the comments who you guys are excited to see, who you guys think the Chargers should draft, who you want me to talk to, who everything combine related. Let me know. I will see you guys probably after I get back. So probably sometime next week if we don't do something midweek to kind of break down what's been going on. But until then, I will catch you guys later. Hope you have a nice rest of your week and happy combine. Peace.